The claim: the Bible is filled with scientific errors. This is a common claim made by atheists and non-Christians to mock the Bible. In this video, we're going to cover 10 things that the Bible supposedly gets wrong about science, and 2 of them might just get me in trouble with Christians. Let's go. Welcome to the Word Room, where we make difficult Bible passages make sense. Let's just get right into it. A TikToker named Mike's Evil Twin 4 put out a video listing these 10 errors. Let's just go through them and see if it holds up.
Scientific errors in the Bible? Sure, let's do it.
So right off the bat, the 6-day creation, that's nonsense. The earth was not created in 6 days. It took 4 billion years at least.
Well, I'm not one to start off with controversy. Just kidding, I actually am. So this is one of those ones that'll probably get me in trouble with Christians.
Better line up with the Word of God or shut your mouth.
But I actually agree with this TikToker in that I don't think the earth was created in 6 literal days. As a matter of fact, I'll go much further than that, and I'll say that the earth is not actually about 6,000 years old, but is much, much older. Put down your stones, young earth creationists. I know you think young earth creationism is one of the pillars of the gospel, but it's not. I plan to release a more in-depth video on this soon, breaking down Genesis 1 and 2 and explaining it. But for now, just let me point out that this TikToker is presuming that Genesis 1 and 2 are supposed to be a literal account of the universe's creation, and he's wrong. Many people are dogmatic and assume that these chapters must be taken perfectly literally the way you read it in 21st century English. But you might be surprised to learn that this is not how the ancients or how much of the early church fathers understood it. Here are some quotes for you. Origen, who wrote in the first half of the 200s, said this: "For who that has understanding will suppose that the first and second and third day, and the evening and the morning existed without a sun and moon and stars, and that the first day was as it were also without a sky. I do not suppose that anyone doubts that these things figuratively indicate certain mysteries, the history having taken place in appearance, and not literally." Origen also said this in Contra Celsum, which was an apologetic work he wrote in response to the pagan intellectual Celsus. "And with regard to the creation of the light upon the first day, and of the firmament upon the second, and of the gathering together of the waters that are under the heaven into their several reservoirs on the third, the earth thus causing to sprout forth those fruits which are under the control of nature alone, and of the great lights and stars upon the fourth, and of the aquatic animals upon the fifth, and the land animals and man upon the sixth, we have treated to the best of our ability in our notes upon Genesis, as well as in the foregoing pages, when we found fault with those who, taking the words in their apparent signification, said that the time of 6 days was occupied in the creation of the world." In other words, Origen was saying that for those who thought the earth was actually created in 6 literal days, they took issue with that and made notes showing how Genesis was not literal, that the story was not supposed to be literal. Augustine, who is one of the most influential theologians in church history, suggested that the biblical text should not be interpreted literally if it contradicts what we know from science and God-given reason. In his writing, The Literal Interpretation of Genesis, which is early 5th century, Augustine took the view that everything was created by God simultaneously, and not in 6 or 7 days, like a plain account of reading Genesis 1 would require. He argues that the 6-day structure of creation presented in the book of Genesis represents a logical framework rather than the passage of time in a physical way. Justin Martyr, writing around 155 AD, argued that the 6 days were not literal and took a form of the day-age theory when he writes this: "For as Adam was told that in the day he ate of the tree he would die, we know that he did not complete 1,000 years. We have perceived, moreover, that the expression 'the day of the Lord is 1,000 years' is connected with this subject." Irenaeus also took a form of the day-age theory and didn't take it literally. And there are some, again, who relegate the death of Adam to the 1,000th year. For since a day of the Lord is 1,000 years, he did not overstep the 1,000 years, but died within them, thus bearing out the sentence of his sin. I could go on, but you get the point. While they had varying ways of understanding the text, it was common for Genesis 1 and 2 not to be taken literally. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go into depth on this video in an explanation of Genesis 1. You're going to need to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell if you want to see that video. It's going to be insane. But here's the point. Genesis 1 is not saying that the cosmos was created in 6 literal days. And the assumption that is the only way to read the text is not evidence of any scientific error in the Bible. And before we move to the next one, I find it funny that this creator is pointing out what they are calling scientific errors while making one. He said the earth took 4 billion years at least to be created. No. He's mixing up the age of the earth and how long it took the earth to form. The current estimated age of the earth is around 4.54 billion years, but it formed much quicker than that. The current estimates state that the earth was mostly complete within 10 to 20 million years. However, a 2023 study published in the scientific journal Nature suggests that the Earth may have formed in as little as 3 million years, which is a lot quicker than the current estimate. I'll link that down in the description below if you'd be interested in reading that. Next clip.
Next is the global flood. That never happened. There's not enough water on the planet for that to even happen.
Well, we're just going to kick over all the sacred cows on this one, aren't we? Hang with me, Christians. You can stone me later. But I again agree there wasn't a global flood. But here's the kicker. The Bible doesn't say there was. So this wouldn't be a scientific error in the Bible. I will again be doing a video on this in the future. Have I mentioned hitting that subscribe button yet? Now I hear you.
How can you say there was no global flood when Genesis 6:17 says, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die.
Yeah, that sounds pretty straightforward. Let's see. We've got the earth. We've got all flesh under heaven. We've got everything on the earth shall die. Yep. Global. Nope. Why are we reading this passage in the English in the 21st century and assuming we understand it fully? Genesis was not written in English, and it wasn't written in the 21st century to a 21st century audience. The word translated earth in these passages is the Hebrew word eretz. Eretz doesn't mean planet or globe. It means land, ground, or country. And when it is paired in the Old Testament with the Hebrew word kol, which means all or every, it almost always refers to a local territory. Sometimes you can tell this because it clearly gives a qualifier and tells you that. Genesis 2:11, the name of the first is Pishon. It flows around the whole land, kol eretz, of Havilah, where there is gold. So it tells us that it's flowing around the whole land, a specific land, but it's using the word kol eretz, whole earth. They're the same words translated that in Genesis in the flood story. And it has the qualifier. But even without the qualifier, we can see that it's speaking of a specific land. Here are some examples. Genesis 13:9, is not the whole land before you, kol eretz? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if to the right, then I will go to the left. Here, the whole land was only the land of Canaan. Genesis 41:57. And the people of all the earth, kol eretz, came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. The people who went to Joseph were only the people in that local region. There were people we know from way in further distance, like China and other places. They didn't come to Egypt. We know that they didn't travel there. This is not talking about the people, ancient people of America and all these other people. This is only the people in that local land, in that region, who came to Joseph. Exodus 34:10. Then God said, behold, I am going to make a covenant. Before all your people I will perform miracles, which have not been produced in all the earth, kol eretz, nor among any of the nations, and all the people among whom you live will see the working of the Lord, for it is a fearful thing that I am going to perform with you. There is no reason to say nor among the nations if all the earth included all the nations already. Clearly, there's a distinction between all the earth, the local land, and all the foreign nations. It's making a clear distinction. 1 Kings 10:24. And kol eretz, all the earth, was seeking the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Again, local land. Not everybody in the entire planet were flocking to Solomon. Only the people in the local region and the surrounding nations right there in that area were coming to Solomon. Still not convinced? How about another one? 2 Samuel 24:8. So when they had gone about through the whole land, kol eretz, whole earth, they came to Jerusalem at the end of the 9 months and 20 days. Clearly, the context of this passage means they went through the whole land that we call Palestine or Israel or Judea. They didn't go through the entire planet. So when the text says that the flood was on the whole earth, the whole land, it doesn't mean the whole planet, but rather the whole local land. It was a regional flood, a local flood. Again, I will get into the depths, pun intended, on this flood passage in a future video. But nope, there is no scientific error here. Now, if you made it this far, Christians, the rest are not as controversial. So put down your torches and let's proceed.
Next is Matthew 13:31, where Jesus says that the mustard seed's the smallest seed. That's false. There are smaller seeds like the orchid.
This is not a science error in the Bible. Jesus was not giving a botany lesson here. He didn't take his disciples to the botanical gardens for a field trip so he could teach them about seeds. Jesus is giving a parable drawing from the audience's life, something they are familiar with. They didn't know about the orchid seed. The mustard seed was the smallest seed that his hearers were accustomed to sowing. Yes, botanically speaking, the smallest of all the seeds is the orchid seed. However, the smallest garden variety seed in Judea, or the entire Eastern world for that matter, at the time of Christ was the mustard seed. It's actually still true today. Jesus is using something they know, the seeds they deal with, to make a point. He's not giving a science lesson or trying to tell them about the actual smallest seed in existence. He's talking about the smallest seed that they are familiar with and work with. This is not a science fail. The next three claims are actually all related to the flat earth.
Next is in Genesis 1:6-8. It mentions a firmament, which doesn't exist. The Bible says that there's a solid roof over the earth, like the Quran says. That's not true. Job 9:6 says that the earth shaketh out of her place, and the pillars therefore tremble. The earth isn't on pillars. In various verses it says that the earth is firm and immovable, but that's wrong. 1 Chronicles 16:30 says this. Psalm 93:1, 96:10, 104:5, they all say this. The earth is moving at thousands of miles an hour across our solar system right now. There's also nothing fixed about the earth at all. It's always changing in terms of its axis or tilt or eccentricity.
Now, I actually debunked all three of these in a previous video. You can click on the link in the description to see the detailed explanation. Basically, the firmament is not a solid roof over the earth, and that's not what the text was saying. The pillars of the earth are not talking about literal pillars that the earth sits on. And when it talks about the earth not moving or being firm, it means not shaken, and it's not talking about physical movement on its axis or revolving around the sun. Check out that video if you want those details. But there was one other flat earth claim in his video that my previous video didn't address, so let's address that.
4:8 points to a flat earth where it says that the devil took him up to an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. You can't see all the kingdoms from the highest, even the highest mountains in the world.
Now, this one is actually revealing a bias that this TikToker has. This TikToker is reading the text in the most uncharitable way possible, without taking time to think it through and see if what they are assuming it means would even make sense. When this happened, Jesus was in the wilderness south of Jerusalem in the middle of Israel. He was closer to the south, and the largest mountain in Israel is way far up north, Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is 9,232 feet high. It is very unlikely that in this encounter, Jesus traveled all the way to Mount Hermon, as it is too far to go and travel in the time frame Jesus had. Now, that's assuming we're taking this literally, which this TikToker is assuming. So if we're going to take it literally that he really went up onto this mountain and saw the kingdoms of the world, then it would be more likely that he would have went to Mount Scopus, which was the largest mountain in that area, at 2,710 feet high. But let's just pretend that he did go to the highest mountain, Mount Hermon. On a clear day from Mount Hermon, you can see over 60 miles from the very peak of Mount Hermon. Jerusalem is 202 miles from Mount Hermon. So from that mountain, you can't even see Jerusalem. And the authors of the Gospels would know that you couldn't see that far into the distance from these high mountains, that they would know from the highest mountain around them, they couldn't even see Jerusalem. So for them to be saying that he saw all the kingdoms of the world physically, literally from the mountain would be an uncharitable reading of the text. There's no way that that's what they meant, because they would know that all their audience and all the people there would know you can't do that. It's just an absurd assumption to assume that's what he's talking about. So what actually is happening? This is a supernatural event. This is Satan, a supernatural being, showing this to Jesus, who is God in the flesh. He is being shown all the kingdoms of the world supernaturally in a vision, not naturally in the flesh. We see other scriptures where Jesus sees things in a vision supernaturally, like the calling of Nathanael, where he sees Nathanael under the tree, and then he tells Nathanael later, and Nathanael marvels because it was a miracle that he was able to see a vision of Nathanael under the tree when Jesus wasn't actually there. It's this kind of vision that's described in Matthew chapter 4. Now, some people will object and say, well, if it was a vision, he could have had that anywhere. Why did he have to take him to the high mountain? Because of its theological importance. There was a consistent sin in the Old Testament. Israel would worship idols and set altars to idols in the high places. This phrase, high places, is used over and over and over throughout the Old Testament. And it speaks of a place of worship usually put on the top of a hill or mountain. And it was primarily worship of false gods. In this temptation, Satan is trying to get Jesus to fall down and worship him. The image of being in the high places is trying to get Jesus to fall into the trap of the Israelites throughout their history, to fall down and worship false gods. There is no science fail here. Next clip.
Genesis 7:11 says that the floodgates of the heavens were opened. That's not how rain works. There's no windows in the sky that make it fall down. It's just from the clouds itself.
The text is not saying there is windows in heaven. Windows in heaven isn't even mentioned at all in this text. And when it talks about the floodgates, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor we actually still use today.
Man, this rain is coming down hard.
Yeah, who opened the floodgates?
You think there are windows in the sky?
What? Of course not. I was just... Never mind.
It's a metaphor. It's not literal. Next clip.
This also refers to the moon as a lesser light. It's not actually a light source. The moon is reflected
The
light.
text never says that the moon produces its own light. That is just this TikToker reading into the text something that isn't actually there. Again, this is just bias showing. Preconceived assumptions or ideas. The moon being called the lesser light does not mean or require the light to originate from the moon. It only requires that the light that we see is coming from the moon. About 12% of the sunlight that hits the moon is reflected back out into space. So the moon is an avenue for light to be reflected onto the earth. So it does shine light onto the earth. It's reflected light, but it's still shining light onto the earth. Therefore, it is a lesser light. This is not a science error.
Revelation 8:10 says that stars can fall from the heavens, which is not true. Stars can't fall. They're not in the sky.
Again, Mike's evil twin assumes this is literally a star. First, this is written in a genre called apocalyptic literature, which is a genre that has many symbols in it. Angels are actually symbolized by stars in Revelation. Revelation 1:20, Revelation 9:1, and chapter 12, verse 4. So it's very probable that this star that has a name called Wormwood is actually a reference to an angel. However, even if you were to take this literally, the problem is that this English-speaking 21st century Westerner is trying to apply their logic to an ancient text with an ancient language. The Greek word that is used here is not star, it is aster. Star is an English word. It's not star like we classify stars in modern science. It's aster, and it can speak of an asteroid, a meteor, any of those type of things in the sky. And if literal, this would likely be a piece of an asteroid or a meteor, which was not unknown to the ancient world. Matter of fact, I'll link down in the description a Harvard paper that talks about the ancient world knowing about meteors and asteroids.
But no matter how many times you point this out to Christians, they're just going to tell you, well, we don't take it literally, right? So, their only response to all this nonsense is that it's to be taken metaphorically. But what that metaphor is unknown.
Yes, we know what the metaphors mean. Who in the world gave this TikToker the impression that we don't have any understanding of what these things mean? It's very clear what they mean, and there's plenty of evidence for what they mean.
Muslims take the Quran totally literally, every word for word is but the Christians, they know that their Bible's garbage, so they become apologists and they make up, excuses. They apologize for why it's nonsense.
Apologetics is not related to the way we use the word apologize in English. The word apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, meaning a speech in defense. It's defending the faith. Apology didn't even mean I'm sorry until the 16th century, primarily due to Shakespeare's usage of the word. The kind of reading of the text that this TikToker engaged in is a reflection of bias. And if you are curious of what that bias is or how it works, check out this video where I explain it.